October 14, 1943. Hundreds of American airmen climbed into B-17 bombers in eastern England. They were flying deep into Germany, farther than their fighters could follow, to attack a city called Schweinfurt and its ball-bearing factories. Commanders promised the raid could cripple the Nazi war machine. Crews knew the cost would be high. They'd seen what happened to the units that flew the same route. 2 months earlier, another raid on the same city in Regensburg had cost 60 bombers. Still, they went. By the end of the day, 60 bombers would never come home. 600 airmen killed, wounded, or captured. The survivors would call it Black Thursday. The U.S. Army Air Forces built their entire strategy on a single belief: that daylight precision bombing could win the war. With Norden, bomb sites, and disciplined formations, they expected to hit vital industrial targets exactly, crippling production without carpet-bombing cities. The aircraft for that plan was the B-17 Flying Fortress. 4 engines, heavy armor, and up to 13.50 caliber machine guns. Flown in tight combat boxes, the bombers overlapped fields of fire so that each one protected the others. In theory, a formation of fortresses could fight its way to any target. No escorts required. Schweinfurt seemed the perfect test. Its factories produced the majority of Germany's ball bearings, small steel components vital to every tank, truck, and aircraft engine. Destroy them, analysts argued, and the Nazi war machine would seize up within weeks. Intelligence missed a key fact. Germany had months of stockpiles and alternative suppliers in Sweden and Switzerland. But in 1943, American planners believed Schweinfurt was a single weak point that could be shattered by air power alone. It sounded like the perfect surgical strike. It wasn't. Early October 1943. At bomber bases across East Anglia, crews briefed for the mission. The route on the wall map traced a long red line, 650 miles each way, across occupied Europe to a city in northern Bavaria and back. Intelligence officers warned of heavy flak belts and Luftwaffe bases lining the corridor. Fighter escort would cover the bombers only to the German border. Beyond that, they would be on their own for hours. Everyone in the room had seen what that meant in August. Still, orders stood. The 8th Air Force would launch nearly 300 B-17 bombers. Each plane carried about 10 men, 4 tons of bombs, and the confidence that their flying fortress could survive the gauntlet. Crews checked guns, oxygen lines, and fuel loads. Ground chiefs chalked names and pin-up art on aluminum noses. Before sunrise, the engines turned over and the first formations rolled down the runways. They were betting doctrine against experience, and experience was about to win. The first formations crossed the English coast around 10 a.m. Each B-17 climbed slowly, keeping tight formation as they reached cruising altitude, 23,000 feet, where the air was thin and the temperature dropped below -40. At first, things looked calm. The North Sea below, a thin overcast ahead. But as the bombers crossed into German radar range, sirens wailed across occupied Europe. Luftwaffe controllers began vectoring fighter groups toward the incoming streams. The American escort fighters, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, could follow only as far as Aachen. When they turned back, the bomber crews could see them banking away to the west. For the next 400 miles, they were alone. One veteran later said, "When the fighters left, you could feel the tension snap inside the plane." The Luftwaffe came in waves. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s slashed through the bomber columns, firing rockets and 20mm cannon shells. The Germans didn't need to shoot every plane down, they only had to break the formations. Within minutes, the sky turned into a battlefield of black smoke and silver fragments. Tail gunners called out fighters, waist gunners fired until their barrels glowed red. Each fortress carried 10 men, each gunner defending a piece of the sky. Some German fighters dove straight through the bomber stream, dropped belly bombs timed to explode in the middle of formations, then peeled away, trailing contrails. Flak bursts followed, throwing shrapnel the size of fists through aluminum skins. Over Frankfurt, the formations staggered, but held. Pilots kept course by instinct. Straight lines meant survival for those behind. By the time the first group neared Schweinfurt, more than 20 B-17s had already vanished from the formation. Around 2 p.m., the surviving bombers reached the target. Schweinfurt's ball-bearing factories were already smoking from flak impacts. Bombardiers opened the bays and released 4 tons of explosives apiece. Precision gave way to chaos. The flak was so dense that crews described it as flying through black snow. Some bombs hit the main SKF and Kugelfischer plants, wrecking machinery and warehouses. But the cost was catastrophic. As the formations turned for home, fresh Luftwaffe squadrons attacked. The long, exposed withdrawal became a running fight all the way back to the Channel. By the time the last bombers limped into English airspace, 60 B-17s were missing, 17 more written off, and over 600 airmen killed, wounded, or captured. One pilot later said simply, "It was like watching whole squadrons disappear into the clouds and never come out." The 8th Air Force had hit its target and nearly bled itself dry doing it. The last B-17s landed in England after dark, fuel nearly gone, engines coughing oil. Airfield crews counted the returning planes in silence. Out of the 291 bombers that left that morning, only 229 came back, many so damaged they'd never fly again. Of the 10-man crews aboard each Fortress, hundreds were missing, 60 aircraft destroyed, 17 written off, 121 damaged. 600 men killed, wounded, or captured in a single day. On the walls of briefing huts, names were wiped from flight boards, entire crews erased in chalk. The survivors were too exhausted to celebrate. One waist gunner later recalled, "It wasn't victory, it was just relief that we weren't next." Headquarters called the raid a success. The ball-bearing plants had been hit hard, but within weeks, German industry adapted. Factories dispersed production, worked double shifts, and imported bearings from Sweden and Switzerland. Output dipped, then recovered. What couldn't recover were the trained crews and aircraft America had lost. Each bomber destroyed meant 10 men gone and months of training wasted. For the 8th Air Force, Black Thursday proved that unescorted daylight raids deep into Germany were suicide. Until long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang entered service, the U.S. stopped sending its bombers that far. The faith that bombers could defend themselves had died over Schweinfurt. In the months that followed, the U.S. Army Air Forces re-examined everything: formation tactics, escort strategy, and aircraft design. Engineers rushed auxiliary fuel tanks into production for the P-47 and P-38 fighters, while the new P-51 program accelerated. By early 1944, Mustangs with long-range tanks could finally escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. When they returned to Schweinfurt in February 1944, losses were a fraction of what they had been. The combination of escort fighters and improved tactics turned the tide of the air war. But that change was paid for by the crews who flew into Germany in 1943. For decades after the war, veterans of the 8th Air Force remembered October 14, 1943, not as a mission, but as a reckoning. It showed that technology and doctrine mean little without realism, and that courage alone can't overcome strategy built on wishful thinking. Schweinfurt became a symbol inside the Air Force, the day they learned what daylight bombing really cost. A single target, a single day, 60 bombers gone. Black Thursday remains one of the deadliest days in American aviation history, and one of its most important.